Hi everyone. First of all, go into Notability, go to your English folder, and open up a new note. You're going to name it OMAM Notes, like of mice and men. And I'd like you to set up your notes just the way that I do for organizational purposes. So I'm going to show you some of the tools that I'm using so that it'll make it a little bit easier for you to get everything lined up where you need it to be. These buttons down here are for indenting. So when you need to move text over into the middle of the page, these are the buttons that you're going to use. Over here in the corner is where the bullet button is, and you'll have some choices. The bullets that you're going to use are the ones right in the middle here. Those are the ones that don't have any numbers on them. Okay, before you get started, I'd like you to take a black pen and draw a line right down the side like I have between the actual notes, the text of the notes, and the categories of the notes. This is an example of Cornell notes. It's kind of a variation on Cornell notes, and it just helps you keep things organized and find the information more quickly when you're trying to scan down through your notes. It just helps with organization. Okay, so obviously we're going to start the notes now, and obviously you can pause whenever you need to so that you can finish typing, but it's a good idea to kind of listen to what I'm saying to explain things as we go along. This will just make it a little bit faster when we're actually trying to find some examples in class so that I don't have to spend a lot of time talking about these things because you've already heard it. So I can refresh your memory, but I don't want to teach it the first time. So the first thing that we're going to start with is character types. And we're going to talk about three of them. The first kind of character type is round or dynamic characters. So round characters are the ones who show a lot of different sides of their personalities. They show many emotions. They seem realistic or human because they are the closest to the people that you bump into every day. The reader can kind of imagine being in their shoes because they feel just as human as the people that they know. The characters, round characters, are often changed by or they learn something from the events in the story. And if they do change in some way from the beginning to the end of the book or throughout the book, we call them dynamic. That's what dynamic means. It means it's changing. Most of the time, these are major characters. These are the ones you're going to bump into a lot. They've got a little bit of history. They've got some backstory. We learn quite a bit about them through various sources in the book. So once again, these are the characters who are going to seem really human and the most like people that you might know. Now, once you've finished taking your notes, I want you to make sure that you leave a little room down here at the bottom because this is where, when we're in class and we're discussing these, talking about them, we're going to put some examples down here from the book so that you can actually figure out who the round characters are. If you want to start thinking about that ahead of time while you're taking notes and fill some in, find out if you're right in class, you can go right ahead. Okay, next we're going to talk about flat or static characters. So these are the characters who only show a limited number of emotions and just a few sides to their personalities. They're not going to show you as many sides and emotions as like a real human being would. Sometimes I refer to them as the Johnny One-Note characters because you kind of just see one side of them. They always seem the same. They're not going to show very much change or growth throughout the story. They're pretty much who they are at the beginning is pretty much who they are at the end. And that lack of change is what makes them static. So a static character is the one that doesn't really have any revelations by anything that happens to them or any of the events in the book. The readers don't really get to know very much about them. They don't have much of a history, they don't have much of a backstory. The information we have for them is really limited. So these are usually minor characters. You might see them once at the beginning or somewhere in the middle, and then they never show up again. So those are just flat characters, don't know much about them. And once again, once you finish taking the notes, leave a little space down here at the bottom because we're going to fill in some examples in class for which of the characters you think might be the flat or the static character. Okay, so on to the next one, which is a stereotyped character. And if you haven't already, if you needed to draw in the line as you continue down the page, please make sure you do that. So a stereotyped character, sometimes they're called stock characters, they can be a little bit confusing because some people think that if they're stereotyped, then they have to be like a black person, or they have to be a Chinese person, or they have to be Asian, and that's not always necessarily the case. Be careful when you're taking your notes that you don't make the same spelling mistake that I made and throw in an extra E in front of characters. That's wrong, shouldn't be there. So these are characters who fit a description that's believed by the public at large, but it might not be true. Okay, so think about the typical belief by everybody, like a nerdy scientist or a ditzy blonde, an absent-minded professor, a damsel in distress, right? These sometimes society believes these things, like all nerds have glasses that you push up, they push up their nose and it's got a piece of adhesive tape around the middle. That's a stereotype. Sometimes they call those characters cardboard cutouts, but they're not going to act much differently than the reader would expect them to. So when you bump into a character like this who pretty much is that stereotype, the nerdy scientist with the adhesive tape around his horn rimmed glasses and the pocket protector, that is a stock character or a stereotyped character. And just like all the other ones, make sure that you leave a little space down there. We'll find out if we have any stock or stereotyped characters in the story. Okay, so the next one is foils. Okay, this isn't like aluminum foil, but a foil is a character that exhibits opposite or conflicting traits to another character in the story. Most of the time, an author is going to use this to make sure that the reader really understands the important traits of one character. So in order to do that, they take a different character who is their complete opposite or something that conflicts with them and kind of put these two characters up next to each other. And then the traits of one help to emphasize the traits of another. I sometimes think of it as using foil, like aluminum foil, kind of like a mirror. And if you step up in front of a mirror, it reflects back. And that's what you would imagine that one of these characters is made of aluminum foil, kind of made of foil, and then reflects back the characteristics of the other character. A lot of times, a foil is an antagonist, like a bad guy being set up against a good guy. It doesn't always have to be that way, but that does happen a lot in stories. And then when you get to the bottom of this and you're finished taking notes, make sure that you leave a little space down here so that we can find out if there are any foils in the story. Okay, next one is a sympathetic character. Okay, now this isn't necessarily a character who is nice to everybody. That's not what sympathetic in this case means. A sympathetic character is one that the reader can identify with or understand. They might have feelings that they can share. The reader kind of gets them. They kind of root for them and they like them. And that can happen even if that character has bad qualities. They don't always have to be nice guys or good guys or protagonists to be a sympathetic character. If you have seen the movie Deadpool, right? Deadpool is not a nice guy. He's got some pretty bad qualities, But the viewers kind of like him, right? We get him, we understand him, we sort of root for him. So that would be an example of a sympathetic character who is not really a very nice person. Okay, and just like usual, leave a little space down there at the bottom so that we can find out, take some notes on whether or not there are sympathetic characters in the book. Okay, so notice now that we have switched categories over here. So, whoops, let's undo that. We have literary devices. So we're not talking about character types anymore, okay? Now, we're going to talk about some of the literary devices that are used, and the first one we're going to cover is point of view. So point of view is just the perspective from which the story is told. And we're going to talk about 4 of them. First person is when the narrator is actually a character in the story. So you're going to hear the word I and me used pretty frequently. The person telling the story was there, they saw it, okay? Second person, the reader is a character in the story. Not just the person who is telling the story, but the reader, him or herself, is also in the story. So you're going to see you and your used frequently. This point of view isn't used very often. It's a little bit more unusual, but I usually think about it kind of in terms of those choose-your-own adventure books where, when you're reading along, it might say, you are in a dark room. You hear a creak from a door across the room, and you hear something slither in across the floor, right? You have been made a part of the story. So you are now a character. Third person limited is when the narrator is not a character in the story. The only thing the reader can do is tell you what, the only thing the narrator can do is tell the reader anything that can be observed from the outside. The reader doesn't know what the characters are thinking because the narrator doesn't know what the characters are thinking. They can only talk about what the characters do or what the characters say. So I always think of it as though it was like a person standing on a corner and witnessing a car accident. The person isn't in the car accident. They weren't there. They're just watching it. They can tell you what happened. Like this car went through the red light and smashed into the car that was in the intersection already, and that car ran into a telephone pole and hit a pedestrian on the sidewalk. All they can do is tell you what they saw. They can't say, the person inside the car that went through the red light was drunk and the person in the other car that got hit saw his life flash before his eyes. They don't know because they can't get inside those people's heads. So all that narrator can do in third person limited is observe and report. That's it. Now, on the other hand, third person omniscient, that's a big word. Omniscient means all knowing. A third person omniscient narrator does know everything and sees everything. They're not a character in the story. The narrator wasn't there to experience it. They just, can report on it, but they can also crawl inside the heads of all the characters and tell you what they're thinking because they know everything, they see everything, they can see the future, they can see the past. It's a little bit like God telling the story. So just like at the end of every other notes, you're going to leave a little space down there and make sure that we have room to talk about what kind of point of view this story might have. Okay, next one is foreshadowing. We have talked about this a couple times in class, but foreshadowing is an author's hint at something that's going to happen later in the story. You might even be able to write some of these down already because we have talked about these in class, but there's at least a couple examples in the book. So make sure you leave a little space down there at the bottom. The next literary device is irony. And the general definition of irony is just the opposite of what is expected. But there are 3 different kinds of irony. The author will use them in different ways for different effects. So the first one is verbal irony. And that's when the author uses words to express the opposite of what is said. For instance, naming your overweight dog Turbo, right? If your dog is so overweight that he can't move very fast, then naming him after something really fast is kind of the opposite of what you would expect. So that would be verbal irony. There's 3 different kinds of verbal irony. Sarcasm is one. That's the one that you might bump into the most. But also exaggeration and understatement are examples of verbal irony as well. So I think you know what exaggeration is, right? We've talked about hyperbole in class before, and that's really overdoing the exaggeration. But understatement is making a statement that that kind of downplays the situation. So if you say that Michael Jordan was an okay basketball player, that is an understatement, right? It kind of downplays what his capabilities really are. So just like all the other times, make sure that you leave a little space down here because there's definitely some examples of verbal irony in the book. If you can think of some, you can write them down. If not, you can wait for our discussion. The next kind of irony is situational irony. This is when literally the situation in a story is ironic. In other words, the opposite of what you would expect to happen happens. And in this case, both the characters and the reader can see the irony. Everybody gets it. So, for example, a person who buys a gun to protect himself, and then that person's house is robbed, and the burglar uses the gun to injure the gun owner. Right? That's the opposite of what you would expect to happen because if you have a gun, you can protect yourself. But if it's an ironic situation, then the gun will be taken away and the gun owner gets hurt. As usual, leave a little space down there. The last one is dramatic irony. Okay, so this is another one where the situation is ironic, but in this case, the reader is the only one who can see, or the viewer, if you're watching a movie, they're the only ones who can see the irony. The characters don't get it. The characters don't realize that the situation is ironic. And this is often because the reader knows something that the characters don't know. For example, like if you're watching a movie with a police detective or reading a book with a police detective, and you already know that the criminal that the detective is looking for is actually his own partner. We know something that the detective doesn't know, so that makes it dramatic irony. And as usual, leave a little space down there. Okay, last one is themes. The general definition, notice that this is now a new category, right? These are not literary devices anymore, so put themes over there in the to the left, way over to the left. And the definition for theme is just a central message or a driving idea in a story. Short stories often just have one theme, but longer stories can have more than one. They can have a lot. And in fact, this story does have a lot, but we're just going to talk about 5. And I would rather kind of wait until we're all together to go off too much on this. So just make the list, and then like you have every other time, just leave a little space there. And when we're together in class, we will talk about some examples of where you see those themes in the book. Okay, that's all. I have one more little thing for you. If you were patient enough to get all the way to the end of this and listen to it, what I would like you to do is send me an email. And in the email, in the subject line, I just want you to write the words Easter egg. Okay? If you send me an email with the word Easter egg in it, in the subject line, and I will give you a little extra credit because it's just going to be proof that you actually listened to the whole thing. That's your reward. Okay. See you later.